Please be aware that this episode discusses sensitive topics that some listeners may find distressing. If you or someone you know has been affected by any of these issues, please refer to the help and resources listed in the show notes for details of organisations that can provide support. Welcome to Mindful Merseyside, the podcast series which aims to improve everyone's physical and mental health in the Liverpool City region and beyond. This episode is called Women's Alcohol Use in Pregnancy and Motherhood, and it's a really interesting chat that we had. So we're going to be talking about some of the issues around maternal drinking, why alcohol recommendations are what they are and how they've changed, and why it's important that we change the discussion around women's drinking. Let's get into it. I'm joined by Dr. Abby Rose, who is a reader in psychology at JMU, and Liz Folan, who's a positive psychology coach, host of the Rise podcast and contributor to Roy Basnett's Liverpool live show every Friday. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thank you.
So if we jump straight into this is probably more one for you, Abby, to start off with. Could you explain the current UK alcohol recommendations for pregnant women and mums, and also why those recommendations have changed over the past years? Because I've been pregnant 3 times. So my eldest is 15 and I've got a baby. And the recommendations in that time have changed wildly.
Yeah, they have.
It's confusing.
Yeah. And the problem is Google never forgets.
Well, yeah.
So in 2016, prior to 2016, the guidelines during pregnancy were you can have 1 to 2 units 1 to 2 times a week. Okay. So pretty much a maximum of 4 units a week.
And just to be clear, is a unit a small glass of wine?
It depends.
Or is it not that simple?
It depends how big your glass is and what the strength of the alcohol is.
Right.
So units, honestly, we often hate units because nobody really understands them. So just saying don't drink more than 14 units a week is often not very helpful. But on average, a small glass of standard alcohol wine is around 1.5 units.
Okay.
A pint of standard beer is just over 2 units, 2.5 units and things. So it's probably more than you think in what you're drinking. And especially now when wine has gone up so much. It's hard to find something that's 12% even these days. So in 2016, the guidelines changed to abstinence. So if you're trying to get pregnant or if you are pregnant, then the advice is don't drink anything at all. The reason why that is because, as with everything, evidence changes. So research moves on, we get new evidence. And over the past decade or so, there has been a lot more research on alcohol and a lot more evidence that actually alcohol is more harmful than we thought before. And also traditionally, alcohol research was conducted for men on men. So women were considered quite messy and they weren't included in research. You know, things like things like pregnancy,
Yeah.
so the possibility of alcohol harming a baby if the woman didn't know they were pregnant during research, hormonal issues, menstrual cycle, menopause, all those things can interfere with nice laboratory-based clinical research.
Yeah.
So the research really was focused on men. And then we realised actually, you know, women are drinking more during pregnancy and there might be some unintended consequences and harms associated with that drinking. And what we know now is that there is something called fetal alcohol spectrum disorder. There's also fetal alcohol syndrome. So fetal alcohol syndrome is probably what most people think about. It's what's associated with certain facial characteristics and things. But actually, fetal alcohol spectrum disorder is a much wider umbrella term of any kind of neurodevelopmental harms associated with drinking during pregnancy. And the kind of the modelled prevalence rate, and what I mean by modelled is that we don't really know, so it's statistically modelled, is around 3.6% of babies in the UK have fetal alcohol spectrum disorder. That's a high rate. And if you talk to a lot of experts, they would say it's probably more.
Ooh.
So what we look at is another way of understanding that, because prevalence rates are quite tricky, is that 1 in 13 pregnancies where there's some level of alcohol exposure, one baby will be born with fetal alcohol spectrum disorder.
Wow.
And again, the chances are that's probably, it may well be higher than that. Now, that's not to say that the occurrence of FASD is equal for all women. So your risk of having a child with fetal alcohol spectrum disorder increases as your alcohol use increases in pregnancy. So that's something that's really important. So the abstinence guideline is what's called a precautionary principle. So the idea is that we actually don't know if there's a safe level. There's no known safe level of alcohol use during pregnancy. Mm-hmm. So public health has gone down the route of saying, well, do you know what, just don't drink.
Yeah.
That's the best thing to do. The other reason why that we have that precautionary principle is because alcohol is very, very confusing and very, very complicated. So what might be a risk for some women might not be a risk for other women, for example. So some women might have a genetic component to alcohol problems and alcohol harm. Other women won't. Some women may have poor diet, and that might interact with the potential of drinking during pregnancy, causing harm. So there are so many individual factors that it's absolutely impossible to tell which babies will or will not be born with fetal alcohol spectrum disorder if the woman drinks during pregnancy. So therefore, that's why there's this precautionary principle of abstinence now.
Okay, so if we talk about women in general, so not pregnant women for a minute, what are the main reasons that women give for drinking alcohol? And this is a question for both of you, I guess.
Well, can I answer that?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, I think we could easily say, personally, if we talk about my lived experience, I've been sober now for 6 years and I selected to stop drinking myself. I didn't have to go to rehab or present as what we see in society as an alcoholic. But I did have an alcohol use disorder. So I had a very disordered relationship with alcohol.
Yeah.
I drank because it's what I did in culturally I was kind of conditioned to drink. I'm Irish. As soon as I became a teenager, I started to drink to rebel. I drank because I thought I was a feminist. In my early 20s, I drank any man under the table. I drank to party, and later on then when I became a professional, I was teaching for years. I drank to de-stress. I drank to connect. I drank to connect with my colleagues after work. I drank to connect with my neighbours, my friends, because everybody around me drank as well. So one of the reasons why I drank, I think, is as a social glue.
Yeah.
But then as a mum, I drank because I was stressed, and parenting is hard work.
Yeah.
And you've got quite a burden of responsibility there as a woman. So you're struggling to juggle the have it all kind of story of working, still holding down the professional role and raising the children as well, with a lot of the responsibility on your shoulders. And it's boring sometimes. It's just boring.
Yeah. I think women listening to this will relate to everything that you've just said. But I guess, Abby, do people's drinking or reasons for drinking change then during those specific maternal periods? Say when you've just had a baby, or, when your children are older and going to bed better maybe, or sleeping through the night, things like that. Do they change women's drinking habits when they're mothers? Yeah,
they can do. So exactly what Liz just said is perfect, because what I do as a psychologist, I'm interested in why people behave the way they do, so why they drink the way they do. And what I tend to look at is the changing reasons why girls and women drink over their life course. What are the different motives at different time points? And we often see that in young adulthood, we tend to drink for social reasons, to enjoy ourselves, to show our independence, show that we're fun and sexy and all those sorts of things. And then we have children, and we find this with all our work that we do with mums. They will sometimes say, I'm still drinking to have fun. And if I go out, it's so rare that now when I go out, I really let my hair down. Yeah. But they're also, the thing that they're using alcohol as more of like a daily thing is to deal with stress. Yeah. They all say it's so stressful, but having that drink in the evening, that's the thing that helps me to unwind quickly. I know it's my time now. I'm going to sit down. I'm going to have a drink with my partner, et cetera, et cetera. So it really takes on that role of, I've deserved this, and this is the thing that helps me to unwind and de-stress quickly.
I found it very lonely as well in the early days as a mum. So I would find I would go to, especially with my the oldest child, who's now nearly 18, and when he was born, the Sure Start provision was brilliant. So every single day I was out, but but I was at mums groups.
Yeah.
So I would socialise with mums and we would meet after, we wouldn't drink there and then, but we would get together later on for meals and things like that. We would always drink.
Yeah.
But I found it very lonely and isolating despite that. Mm-hmm. And so when I had my second child, that was 12 years ago, that provision wasn't there anymore. Yeah. And that was even more isolating. Yeah. And I didn't make as many friends actually that time. And a lot of my friends were in work. My partner at the time was at work and he wasn't particularly that interested when he'd come home to hear about what was going on with Johnny and Freddie and how their developmental stages have come on. So I found the experience of motherhood quite lonely in those days.
Yeah.
So that's partly why I drank. And also I would connect with people on social media when I was drinking at the same time.
Yeah.
Or on the phone.
Yeah. I think that's really interesting because we find again that a lot of women we talk to, especially when you're talking around alcohol harm and things like that, and they say, but my mum drank or my gran drank or something like that, and I'm okay. And I know people who drank during pregnancy and all that kind of thing, and then continue to drink when they're a mum. But actually, when you look at the data on how women are drinking, the way women drink has changed massively.
Yeah.
So we drink more than we used to. So there's always been this gender gap, for example, between men's drinking and women's drinking. Men have always drunk more than women. More men drink heavily. But that gender gap is decreasing, and that's not because men are drinking less, it's because women are drinking more. So we're drinking more often. And that's for lots of different reasons. One is that we have become more independent, so more financially we are able to buy our own alcohol. We have more accessibility into those kind of like traditionally men's spaces for drinking. But also most of our drinking happens in the home. So that massive barrier that used to be there, that mums were at home, that idea of chained to the kitchen sink, couldn't go out, etc., etc. But now we can just go online and order a case of wine to be delivered or beer or whatever it is to be delivered. So it's in the house. And if something is in the house, like chocolate biscuits, if it's there, you're going to eat it. And if the alcohol is there, you're going to drink it. So it becomes so easy for alcohol to become that daily part of your routine.
Yeah, it does. And also, I think for me, especially with the second child, because social media had come on so much, I could always find somebody who would be a willing partner in crime.
Yeah.
So I was alone, but I would always find somebody who I knew. And at the same time, I was training, I was running, I was training for marathons. And I had one friend in particular, and she drank like I did. And we always smoked when we drank. And without fail, if it was a mummy wine time, I would text her and say, Are you having a glass? Should we have a glass? We might as well have a glass. And we'd talk on the phone or we'd text each other and we'd be, in it together. Yeah. And that was there, that was readily available. It wasn't necessarily as available when my son was born.
Yeah.
But I think that, and this time they had the rise of, blogs like Mummy is a Secret Drinker, and you can see that they made them into books and they were huge in popularity at that time.
Yeah, there was a lot of things. And this was one of the things I noticed so I hadn't really done as much research specifically around girls and women's drinking before I had children. And it was only after I'd had kids that I realised how much mums talk about drinking. Yeah. That it's that kind of, it is like a social glue. It's something that you can talk about. It's something you can bond over. Yeah. You can talk about how stressful everything is and, don't we need a drink? And everything is kind of supporting that narrative. Mm-hmm. Everything you see in social media, all the funny memes, all the funny blogs, mums need wine, and all that kind of thing. It's just there telling you that this is what you should be doing and this is what everybody else is doing. It's completely normal.
Well, I actually saw the other day on a baby grow, it was some joke about like a bottle for me and a bottle for mummy type of thing, which when you actually think about it kind of isn't great, is it?
That is shocking. And I remember seeing something in John Lewis actually, a gin called something like Unicorn Tears or something like that. And I just thought, seriously, who was marketing this? You're positioning little girls essentially as it's just crazy.
There is a lot of marketing around women's alcohol use and that kind of like strong, independent, feminist woman, and it's your right to drink. But there's also a lot of marketing specifically around mums. Yeah. And again, it's that idea of you absolutely deserve it. This is your way of unwinding. You do all this stuff out there. Of course it's stressful. Of course you deserve to drink alcohol.
Well, I wanted to go back to that because you said earlier that people use it as a reward. And everyone's done that. There's absolutely no judgment here because we've all gone, oh my God, I really deserve this glass of wine. Yeah. Or, you know, whether it's anything that's unhealthy for you.
Yeah.
Is that dangerous, Abby, to get into that frame of mind of I'm going to reward myself with something that isn't good for me? Because there isn't anything in alcohol that is good for you, is there?
No. So there used to be all this idea that small amounts of alcohol on a semi-regular basis is good for you. But again, the research and evidence has moved on. Yeah. So really, even if you do drink, don't drink because you think it's healthy. It's not. Drink for other reasons if you're going to.
Yeah, wasn't there something about the iron in Guinness or something was good for pregnant women?
Just to give it in hospitals.
Do you know that still comes up when I'm interviewing mums who've just had babies. I thought iron in the Guinness was good for you. It's like, oh my God, call the midwife. Has things down the but no, so it's not healthy at all. And I think that the idea with the reward is the issue. I think is that becoming a routine, that when it becomes part of your daily routine, so you're doing it every single day. And what I often find, and we've talked about this in the past, is that there are specific ideas that we have around what is harmful drinking and what is not harmful drinking. And if you are drinking 1 or 2 glasses of wine a night, you know, say you open a bottle of wine and you share it with your partner over a meal, sitting down, watching TV, you're not in a pub, you know, tottering around, not, you know, losing your balance and things like that. You think you're sober. You think you're drinking in a non-harmful way. Mm-hmm. And you don't associate it in any way with hazardous or harmful drinking. You think it's absolutely fine. But then when you take a step back and you realise that you've been doing that for months or maybe even years, and then you work out actually how many units that is. And often what we tend to find as well is that women will say they'll have 1 or 2 drinks each night and then they'll have more at the weekend because it's the weekend. So rather than having half a bottle of wine, they might have a full bottle of wine. And then also they might and they might also have a couple of gin and tonics or something like that. When you actually tot up how many units that is, it is within the hazardous and sometimes within the harmful level of alcohol use. But because it's not associated with that idea of what we think of as harmful drinking, as in, oh, I need a drink as soon as I get up, I'm shaking if I don't drink, and all those sorts of things, you perceive it as, oh, it's all right. Yeah. And also, my friends are drinking like that as well. So it must be completely normal. So it's challenging that narrative around the fact that there is harmful drinking and there is non-harmful drinking. Drinking happens on a spectrum and harm does as well.
Yeah. Well, I guess that's the same as that 5 o'clock somewhere, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's that putting that rule in place for yourself that as long as it's past a certain time, then it can't be harmful because you're not cracking open a bottle of wine at 3:30 in the afternoon.
And I think when you start putting rules in place, then you have to start questioning what it is that why you're putting the rules in place. Because that was very much where I started to come undone when I started to think, well, why am I not drinking at this stage? And why have I said I'll only drink on a Friday? And why am I breaking those promises to myself? Yeah. When I don't put the cork back in the bottle.
Yeah.
So
that's a very good point. Yeah. Now, Abby, you mentioned that the rates of alcohol exposed pregnancy in the UK are very high here. Why is that, do you think?
Well, again, the data is difficult, because obviously a lot of women don't want to admit to drinking during pregnancy. And as we've said, there's absolutely no judgment here. But most women do drink during pregnancy. So the estimated rate is around 42% of pregnancies. There's some level of alcohol exposure. But when you look at different research, some teams have found that 75% of women are saying that they've drunk alcohol during pregnancy. A lot of the time that happens before pregnancy recognition. So a lot of women don't know when they've fallen pregnant, and it can take, a few weeks or a month or so. And so they drink during that time. And then the levels tend to fall off after pregnancy recognition, but it's, they're still fairly high. Mm-hmm. I think the reasons why it happens is because of our drinking culture. Mm-hmm. We are very much in the UK, and there are other countries around the world, but everything involves alcohol. Yeah. I've had mums who have said that when they gave birth, they had 3 different people come in, all of them brought a bottle of wine in and said, oh, finally you can have a drink. You wet the baby's head, you're having a drink. when you're kind of like, you've got over maybe the first few weeks of complete sleep deprivation, you think, oh, I can enjoy having a drink. I can sit down. I can do this. I can go out and see my friends again and have a drink. But also, before we become pregnant, alcohol is so important. You know, it's the way we start to become independent when we're teenagers. Often we start to experiment with things. We start to take risks, and one of them usually is that we start to have a drink and we try it. We might go to university. There's a big drinking culture at a lot of universities, and then we continue to drink and we're having fun. And it's a way that we bond. We make friends when we're drinking. There's, you know, we talk about FOMO, and we've done research with young people with fear of missing out, and that it's a real pressure for them. If they feel that they haven't gone out and drunk, they've really missed out on that experience, and they and they really think, well, this has damaged my friendship and relationship. So they make sure they go out next time and they get drunk. So it's all these things. And as I said earlier, alcohol is something that helps us to self-identify as what we want to be, that we're fun and that we're independent and we're sexy and all those things. So to suddenly turn round after that kind of lifetime of being told that alcohol is important and that we should be drinking, to suddenly turn around to a woman and say, oh, you've got to stop drinking now.
Yeah, but the husband, he can carry on.
Yeah, yeah. So,
Daddy's okay.
Yeah, and I think there is, certainly traditionally, it was always, everything was put onto the woman. So the woman has to stop drinking. There is some progress there. So we're finding that there are more partners saying that actually, if you're going to stop drinking, I'm going to stop drinking, or I'm certainly going to reduce my drinking and not drink in the house in front of you and things. So we're seeing that, but not to the extent that we want to. Yeah. But I would say, the reason why we have such high levels is just, it's cultural. And to turn around and say that, women are bad mothers if they drink during pregnancy, that's a shocking thing to say. And it's not true in any way. But, when you have told somebody for their whole life that alcohol is important and that everybody does it, you don't have to have an alcohol use disorder to then find it difficult to not drink.
Yeah, because if you think there's a drink for every occasion, isn't there? You've got a new job. Oh, let's go for a drink to celebrate. Oh, it's your birthday. Should we have some drinks?
I'm feeling sad.
Yes, or, we're at a funeral. Let's raise a glass. It's everywhere, isn't it? And it's ingrained in our culture of it's associated with everything. With everything.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is, absolutely. So, it's very difficult. And that's why I've always said that when we are trying to, and I agree with the abstinence principle during pregnancy, just for the fact that it's so complicated and you can never tell who will be at risk and who won't be at risk. I would never dare to say to a woman that it's easy to stop drinking, or you don't need support, you just stop, obviously, because that's what everybody does.
But that's so refreshing, Abby, because that's not the message that I heard when I was pregnant or when I tried to stop drinking. That message is very much like, well, can't you just stop? Or you're pregnant, or if you're not rock bottom, so why can't you stop? It must be easy. So I think that message needs to be spread widely for women.
Yeah, because I think that's shown in things like Dry January, and now there's Sober October as well, isn't there? The amount of people who would consider themselves to not be dependent on alcohol in any way at all, and they go, I'm going to do Dry January. And we all know these people. Yeah. I've been one of these people multiple times. And you go, oh God, I only did 10 days. Yeah. And then I caved. And on paper, it's 4 weeks? Yeah. It shouldn't be difficult, but it is.
I used to joke when I used to do things like Dry January, but one of the ones I did was, I did great. I did 23 days with only one breakout on day 17. Yeah. It's ridiculous. Absolutely
But that's
ridiculous.
For everybody, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's not like most people can just stop drinking and not think about it again, because I think most people who drink alcohol would find that really daunting, to think that they can't or shouldn't have a drink again.
Yeah, it's really tricky. As I said, we've worked with a lot of mums, and sometimes you will get women saying, well, why are you telling me not to drink? And so we explain the evidence, we try and tell it to the woman, but there's also the question of, well, why are you finding it so difficult? And again, that's not to put the blame on the woman. It's about, what is it about our society that has created a position where something that could potentially harm the child is something that you're really struggling to give up and you haven't got an alcohol use disorder, you don't need clinical treatment or anything like that. And it's about then finding out, well, what can we do to change that cultural narrative and expectation that actually women find it much easier to say, oh, actually, I'm pregnant. Of course, yeah, I'm not going to drink.
Yeah.
So there is a thing to say that pregnant women would find it difficult to talk to health professionals about their drinking habits. And we've mentioned, feeling judged or, not wanting to admit to how much maybe you're drinking. How can that be made easier for women?
I think when you were talking earlier, Abby, about the identity piece, and I think as mothers as well, I think first of all, when you're addressed as mum, and instead of by your name, I used to find that really infuriating. Yeah. So almost, I felt that my identity had suddenly been eroded. So part of my drinking would be as a kind of means of reinforcing that previous earlier identity.
Yeah.
So I think maybe something around the language of how we discuss these issues so educate health professionals when it comes to the language that's used around parents.
Yeah, language is incredibly important. I think as well, we have to understand that because it is complicated and because it is a stigmatizing issue, the only way we're going to get women on side and to help them open up is to give them kind of time and to write and to ask the right questions. It's incredibly difficult for midwives. You've got a 10 or 15 minute appointment. You've got to cover alcohol, diet, smoking, domestic violence, all these sorts of things. And they know that the next person is waiting to come in to the clinic. So it's really difficult. But we've done work where we've asked women about what their experiences were during pregnancy with midwives and GPs and nurses and other healthcare professionals. A lot of the time, they'll say they don't remember being asked about their drinking. Or if they were asked about their drinking, they were just said, oh, right, so you need to abstain. You shouldn't be drinking. The problem I find with that is that, again, you're telling women what to do rather than explaining to them why the guidelines are what they are. So we've talked about things like fetal alcohol spectrum disorder, but also but as I said, there are lots of complicated factors about why some women might be at risk of greater harm than others. And it's kind of enabling midwives and other healthcare professionals to understand that information and to ask the right questions that will be meaningful to that woman. And I can give a personal example. So I grew up, both my parents had very severe alcohol use disorder. So I know what it's like to grow up in that very kind of chaotic lifestyle and watch your parents' kind of health deteriorate because they're drinking. You don't really understand why. And when I got into alcohol research, I learned all about the genetic factors and the risks and things like that. I knew that because of that genetic factor, if I had children, they would be at an increased risk of at some point developing alcohol use problems. I also know that if I drank during pregnancy, I increase the risk of my child experiencing alcohol use problems as they're older. So because of that experience of my childhood, the idea of if I drank during pregnancy, I would increase the risk of my children having alcohol use problems when they were older. Even if it was, the increased risk was 0.001%, that was enough for me to say, oh, I'm not drinking during pregnancy. But for some people, that's not going to be that important. They're not going to be too worried about that. But there'll be something else that they find is relevant to them and they can apply to them. So it's about talking to women, finding out what their lived experiences, what their lives are and circumstances, and then going, well, do you know what? The reason why we're suggesting you don't drink during pregnancy is this. And then when you've got them on side, because most women, when you actually explain it to them why, they're very open to it. And then they go, oh, of course. Oh, right, okay. And then you give them the help and support they need and kind of ideas of skills and things of how they can actually do it.
I don't think probably that messaging is getting through, though, is it? I've recently had a baby and I don't know anything that you've just said.
Yeah. And I don't.
And, I had brilliant healthcare. Yeah. I couldn't praise them more. But in that initial, like you said, that initial booking in appointment, they're trying to cover everything. And I the midwife didn't say, she will have asked me about all the things you said, like the diet and the drinking and the smoking, but there was no reasons why. I just answered the questions. I didn't know, didn't think too deeply into why.
Yeah. And so that's why a plug for ongoing research now. So we're just doing some research with women at the moment to ask them what questions they would prefer. Yeah. And what information they would prefer and how would they prefer that information to be given. So and if there are any listeners who want to be involved in that, then get in contact, because unless we work with women to develop these questions and to develop this information and resources, we're not going to get it right.
Yeah.
So it's really important.
So that's the guidelines for drinking in pregnancy. And that now seems to be quite clear. It's don't.
Yeah.
What about breastfeeding? Because that...
oh, God. Now that's another grey area.
that's more... The guidance is more confusing. And it does seem to me that it depends who you talk to or answer you get.
Or where you Google.
Yeah.
So the breastfeeding and drinking. So there isn't clear guidance. And it's basically because the research doesn't exist. The type of research you really need to do to have the evidence say this is okay, this isn't okay, it's just not really there. So the guidance is, so when you go on to Google, Dr. Google, and lots of different places, they'll say you can drink while you're breastfeeding. Don't drink too much. Don't drink to the point, certainly, that you wouldn't be able to look after your child. Don't drink so much that when you're breastfeeding your child, you will drop it or anything like that.
I heard that.
So it's quite a common one, and it's because there's a real push to increase breastfeeding rates for lots of very good positive reasons. But to try and do that, there's kind of like an argument that we have to take down the barriers to breastfeeding, and one of the big barriers is drinking. A lot of women say, "Well, I wanted to drink, so I stopped breastfeeding."
I know people who did that.
I do.
Yeah, and it so it does happen. The thing is, when we drink alcohol enters our blood system and then it enters our breast milk. So if there's alcohol in your blood, there's alcohol in your breast milk. As the alcohol leaves your blood system, it will leave your breast milk. So if there's no alcohol in your blood system, there's no alcohol in your breast milk. The problem is there are vague guidelines on how long it takes to metabolize alcohol. So most people say, if you've had one drink, you've probably metabolized it 1 to 2, like 2 hours later, you won't have any alcohol in your system. So some people use that as a way of saying, oh, well, then I can drink, and then as soon as I've finished 2 hours later, I won't have any alcohol in my system. But if you've drunk more than a unit or two, after 2 hours, you've still got alcohol in your system.
And this might sound like a silly question. Do different people metabolize alcohol differently?
Yes.
Right. So it's not a one size fits all. It's not I've had one drink, 2 hours later, it's completely gone, I'm fine.
No.
Right. Okay.
No. And it affects things like age, affects alcohol metabolism, weight, size, all those things affect it. If you've been eating, that will affect how the alcohol is being absorbed and things like that. So again, it's a bit like drinking in pregnancy. There are so many other factors that are affecting things. It's very difficult to say, if you drink that amount and then you leave it for this amount of time, you are absolutely safe. So it's one of those things, but I do think there is more research needed because it's really confusing, the messaging around it.
And if it's confusing, you will find a loophole if you want to find a loophole. That's the thing, isn't it?
Yeah.
So that's the pregnancy and the breastfeeding. For drinking in general, for women who aren't pregnant or breastfeeding, the messaging is confusing. If you're looking at the government messaging, if you're looking at marketing from certain companies, if you're looking at social media, how can we make it easier for women to get the information they need?
So there needs to be clear and consistent messaging. So depending on where you look, you get different information. So actually the UK, the Chief Medical Officer guidelines are don't drink more than 14 units a week. That's it. There is then guidance to say spread those 14 units up to 14 units. 14 units is not a target. It's a limit. It's a very easy to achieve target. But so you're supposed to kind of like spread those units over at least 3 days. So you don't drink all 14 units in one day. And then the argument is that you have at least 2 or 3 days a week that you're completely alcohol free. But 14 units is the thing that some people will argue that you need to remember, but it's very, very easy to get to it. And also, if you look at bottles of wine now, it used to be, because when I was back in the day when I was doing my PhD, it was like a bottle of wine is 9 units. done, that's it. You look at a bottle of wine now, and it's like 12 units, 13 units, you know, so one bottle of wine, you know, you're getting to the point of you've already used your weekly units up and things. So it's about clear and consistent messaging. It's about clear and consistent labelling as well. Mm-hmm. So there are consultations happening at the moment about changing alcohol labelling and things to try and make things clearer. But again, I think the important thing is how we change the narrative always about, so give women consistent, clear information, and it's about supporting them to make the right decision for them to reduce potential for alcohol harm. But again, it's often, I don't know if you find this, Liz, it's often framed that like no more than 14 units. So again, it's even the language, it's like it's a target. Yeah. And as long as I'm drinking less than 14 units, it's fine.
I'm fine.
But I know myself that on a public health stage, yes, maybe 14 units is okay. But I know that if I drink, and if I maybe very rarely drink maybe twice in 1 week, I feel ill. Yeah. And I'm much more likely to develop a cold or something like that. Mm. So I know that 14 units for me actually isn't good, that I shouldn't ever even get close to that amount. So it's about kind of individuals understanding their own risks and bodies as well. So again, making their own informed decisions.
I think what's actually becoming more apparent now is a lot of people who I like on podcasts that I listen to, health podcasts, and you know, younger people tend to be opting not to drink because of how it disrupts their sleep. Mm. So I think it's how it can be presented.
And sleep is a people. Massive one for mums. Yeah. It comes again and again. So what we often find is I look at motives for drinking, but I also look at motives to stop drinking or reduce drinking.
Sleep is big.
And sleep is one of the biggest ones. And also I find, because I do work around alcohol use across the life course, I also find a lot more mums now have pretty young children and they're entering perimenopausal stage, which really messes your sleep up.
Yeah.
And I find that a lot of women, and you find it with all kind of anything that affects your mental health. Some people will drink in response to that as a coping method. Some people will stop drinking. And one thing I find in motherhood, there tends to be more women saying that they're drinking to cope. Menopause hits. And you find this real split. There are some women saying, "Oh, I'm absolutely drinking to cope with perimenopause and dealing with my kids and things like that." I know a lot of women
in that category.
And other women are saying, "No, I had just had to stop completely because it was messing my sleep up so much."
Now, I think I would like to mention again, there's absolutely no judgment here at all about people's drinking habits. And one of the reasons I want to say that is because I do feel like women, especially mothers, are held to a much higher standard with this than men. And a recent example of this, Sophie Turner, who's the actor from Game of Thrones, she was married to one of the Jonas brothers. They've recently split up. She's been out pictured with her friends, drinking, having a great time. And the narrative in the media was very much, where are her children? Yeah. Why is she out? Who's got her kids? Where her partner, who was a man, was doing the same thing. And the narrative was not that at all. And I mean, that doesn't help, does it?
No. There's a huge amount. So I think of alcohol very much as a gendered behaviour. The reasons why women drink differ from men. Yeah. The harms that we are vulnerable to are often different from men. Mm-hmm. And the way we are judged for our behaviour is very different from men. And we see this from childhood. So we do work with underage drinkers as well. And right from adolescence, you can see that there's this difference between the boys drinking and the girls drinking and the stereotypes and judgments made. And that follows all the way through. Mm-hmm. But then when you get to motherhood, this idea of what mothers should be, and I get it all the time when I do research still, is there's this expectation that the only women who are mothers or pregnant women or mums who are drinking alcohol are people with an alcohol use disorder and they have no control over it. The idea that women without a problem, a so-called problem, are also drinking, it doesn't even bear considering. It's crazy. And the way in which there's this online discourse as well about, you know, if you do that, you're a bad mother. And there's also, it's completely contradictory as well, because you tend to find on one hand, you've got these people say, yeah, celebrate, you deserve it. You're celebrating, you're being a great mum, you're still fun, you've still got this social identity. On the other hand, but if you drink too much or if you drink in that way, you're really bad mum and you don't deserve your kids and how could you do that? So it's so confusing.
Yeah, all you have to do is go into Asda on Mother's Day and see all of the wine that's packaged and targeted at women. you know, and the cards, the boozy cards for birthdays and for every excuse to drink, really. It's all there, isn't it?
But they are judged very harshly. So I'm not surprised women feel confused and angry about it.
Which is why they have online, you know, for support groups like Soberistas, the group that I'm a member of, which is why they tend to be anonymous still.
Yeah.
You know, and why I speak out so openly about it.
And we do find this. Yeah. We know that there are a lot of women drinking at harmful levels. We know that there are a lot of women out there who need support, but they do not go. Lots of them will not go to their GPs. They won't go through NHS trusts and things like that because they are really afraid of what the potential consequences are for their drinking. I've spoken to women who actually don't drink that much, but even they're scared about being honest about to their GP about how much they drink. And there would be no consequences whatsoever. But there is this fear instilled in women that they mustn't behave in this way. Mm-hmm. And so when they maybe find that they are struggling and then they do want help, they often don't know where to turn. And then we are seeing this increase in kind of more women-specific help, and it's often online. Yeah. There are some community-based and things like that. But it's that need for women-sensitive approaches and treatment so we can make sure that the support we're offering is genuinely relevant to women and appropriate to their needs everywhere in their lives.
Because I do remember myself going to the GP and saying, I think I may have a problem with binge drinking. I think I'm drinking too much. And I remember him kind of dismissing it. You know, you're middle class, you're professional, you're working, you're fine. I didn't present as somebody who had a problem at the time. And that was about 15 years ago.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, you mentioned like a rock bottom. So there is this stereotypical view of somebody who has an issue with alcohol. They're drinking in the morning. You wake up, you've got a bottle of vodka in a brown paper bag. You know, that is your stereotypical alcoholic or somebody with an issue with alcohol. Forgetting that, if there are women listening to this now who say, I like the way you phrased it, it's an unhealthy relationship with alcohol. Yeah. So your alcohol use is having a detrimental effect on your life to whatever point, and you're maybe thinking, do you know what, I think I could probably do, even if it's not forever, you think I could do with a little break here, but I feel like I need some support. Like you said, it can be very isolating. I'd like to feel part of something to help me. Where can those women go?
I would say the first thing to do is look up Soberistas online. Okay. Because it's a wonderful support network set up by Lucy Rocker. And she was on this morning about 10 years ago, and I happened to be breastfeeding my baby with a hangover, feeling like death. And I had that on in the background, and I was thinking, is this how far I've stumbled to this level? I've got this morning on in the background, I'm drinking a gallon of tea, I feel miserable, and I've got a baby here. And she spoke, and when she spoke, I realised she was telling my story. And again, she was quite rock bottom at that stage. I mean, she ended up in hospital, but she was a binge drinker and a leadette and professional. And she set up an online support group, which just grew into something that's global now. But that's just one area you could go to, Soberistas, because I think when you see people are telling your story, when you see yourself reflected back, because you don't see that in the media, you don't see that in mainstream media, even to this day. If you look at representations of mums drinking and things like Bad Mums is on telly, and any of the Sex and the City, even, you know, the glamorization of boozing. Even Miranda had to be rock bottom. Yeah. They couldn't have a kind of grey area. Even the recent Netflix One Day that came out, I completely identified with their drinking because they're the same age as me, as they drank throughout the course of the series. But it was his drinking was and drug taking was what was featured. Yeah. But I think to get back to looking for support, Soberistas, there's Club Soda. Yeah. If you just Google online, if you go onto your podcast app, you can look at sober podcasts. There are so many of them out there.
Yeah, there's lots of
Quit Lit.
It's called, isn't it?
Yes, I would recommend This Naked Mind by Annie Grace. That's great because you've got the neuroscience behind that as well. So you've got an idea of, you know, it's not you. Your brain is just doing what brains do when you put an addictive substance in your body.
And there is lots of support, isn't there? Because I can see how it would be incredibly isolating if you're thinking, I could really do with stopping here, but all your friends, you know, your social circle and your life revolves around that. It would be very easy to think, but how? What am I going to do? Who am I going to see? Where am I going to go?
A lot of people get stuck.
Yeah.
I remember meeting a woman in Ireland when we were camping recently enough, and she said, oh, you don't drink, that's great. She said, I did it there for a year, and my relationship was on the rocks as a result because I wasn't drinking with my drinking buddy.
Yeah.
So I went back to booze. So a lot of people do end up, and that was me. I was starting and stopping and going back to my social groups.
Yeah. And Abby, is there anywhere that you'd signpost people to go? Anything else?
There are lots of, so there are a growing number of online communities which can be really helpful for some and not helpful for others because they don't have the digital literacy, they don't have the access and things like that. But again, there are places where if you can go to local community organisations, and there probably are some in your area that you might not know about, but you can find them, and they can go cafes, and you can talk to the people who work there. There tend to be there's definitely a growing number of community-based organisations, but there's also a growing number of communities that maybe kind of serve different groups of people. So it is a case of kind of looking, but there's things like Sober Girl that are kind of more around younger girls, young kind of adults.
Millie Gooch is one.
Like doing lots of fun things and things, but without the alcohol. So you're not, you know, it's very much about you can still have fun. You can still live an amazing, exciting life and do everything just without the alcohol. And again, you don't have to think, I've got to be completely sober to do this. It can just be a part of, you know, kind of like looking at your lifestyle and being healthy. It doesn't mean you have to be 100% sober or anything like that. It's about finding what is right for you and what works for you at this point in time.
I think 1 year no beer is quite good as well if you look that up. Club Sober or Club Soda. There's a Club Sober here in Liverpool. They have monthly sober nights, which are great. So if you Google that. But Club Soda, they have people who are moderating.
Yeah, they do.
So
I think so it's great that there are these sources of support and things. But the one thing that I would say is that we need to be doing much better within kind of the more traditional NHS, public health, government services.
Yeah, I agree.
To say, well, actually, this is all available here as well. And the way we talk with women and get them on our side means that they won't be scared anymore to come to the GP and talk about it. And they will get the information that they need. They will get the referral that is appropriate to them, or the access to the support that is, you know, signposted to something that will genuinely help them. So I think we've got a long way to go, but I think we can work together to make that happen. It shouldn't just be GP or, you know, an online thing. We should all be working together to say, actually, there is a massive network of support out there. We understand what's going on and there is a way forward and we can reduce harm. I think that's really crucial.
Yeah, that is definitely, it's essential, isn't it, really?
Well, that seems like a nice place to leave it, and it's great to know that all that support out there. It's been such an interesting chat. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
You've been listening to Mindful Merseyside, brought to you by the Institute for Health Research at Liverpool John Moores University and produced by Inabella Media. We hope you found the conversation informative and insightful. If you or someone you know has been affected by any of the issues discussed in this episode, please refer to the help and resources listed in the show notes for details of organisations that can provide support. I've been your host, Gemma Cutting, and don't forget to subscribe to Mindful Merseyside wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks again for listening, and I hope you'll join us again soon.